Times front page for Wednesday, June 29th, 2022. Thanks for joining us. I'm George Gerbo. The star witness of the House January 6th committee testified that President Trump was so unhinged about losing the 2020 election that he got into a physical altercation with a Secret Service agent, threw his lunch against a wall, and demanded that armed supporters be allowed to attend his final rally before marching on the U.S. Capitol. Mika Sellner and Joseph Clark report former aide to then White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows Cassidy Hutchinson gave the Select Committee a behind-the-scenes view of the West Wing in the frantic days and hours leading up to the riot by a pro-Trump mob at the Capitol. She described a president increasingly desperate to overturn the legitimate election results and advisors who were unable or unwilling to dissuade Trump from his reckless course of action. Hutchinson's testimony was sometimes based on hearsay. She relayed the story of Trump fighting with his primary Secret Service agent Robert Engel on January 6th. She said another White House colleague told her about the confrontation, which occurred in the presidential vehicle after Trump left his rally near the White House. The Secret Service has pushed back on some of Hutchinson's testimony, though the agents involved haven't yet agreed to testify publicly. In a week of high-stakes diplomacy, President Biden scored largely symbolic wins during his meeting in Germany with the heads of the other G7 leading industrial nations. Jeff Murdoch reports the president departed the summit without securing a consensus to cap the price of Russian oil, impose tougher sanctions on Russia, or expand a plan to counter China's growing global influence. In one positive development, Turkey has dropped its objections and cleared the way for Sweden and Finland to join NATO in reaction to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Biden will now head to Madrid for a gathering of NATO leaders. He'll be challenged to maintain the unity of the alliance as the costs of the war in Ukraine continue to mount. Federal investigators say they have 3 smuggling suspects in custody after at least 50 migrants died of heat exposure after being trapped in the back of a truck in Texas. Stephen Dinan reports the truck was found alongside a rural road in San Antonio. Homeland Security Investigations, which is leading the probe, confirmed it had detained 3 people believed to be a part of the smuggling conspiracy. Authorities said they were alerted to the truck Monday after a city employee heard a cry for help coming from inside. All of the injuries and fatalities were heat-related, according to authorities. The fatalities marked one of the worst tragedies in border history. You can read all of these stories at WashingtonTimes.com/front page. If you don't have access yet, you can visit WashingtonTimes.com/George for a special subscription offer. Huawei's new charm offensive to win over skeptics in the free world includes a fresh target, the media. The Chinese telecommunications giant sponsored an event this week with the Wall Street Journal on safety and security in an unstable world after accusing the newspaper of bias against Huawei and a lack of credibility. Ryan Lovelace reports representatives from Huawei and the journal's publisher, Dow Jones, did not address how the relationship went from hostile to chummy during the event. The virtual discussion included a disclaimer that the journal's newsroom was not involved in the event's planning. The journal reported in 2020 that U.S. officials said Huawei had the ability to access backdoors in mobile phone networks. The Chinese company responded by accusing the paper of bias and amplifying lies. And finally, a presidential transfer of power this week in the Philippines could either enhance or undermine American efforts to unify Asian democracies against China's expanding economic and military activity. Guy Taylor reports 2 familiar names will begin leading the Philippines into uncharted territory on Thursday as Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is inaugurated president. It comes decades after his dictator father was overthrown as the South Pacific country's leader. Sara Duterte, the daughter of outgoing firebrand populist President Rodrigo Duterte, will be sworn in as his vice president. Marcos is popularly known by his childhood nickname Bong Bong and completed an astonishing personal comeback with a convincing win in a May 9th election. He signaled a desire to improve the long-standing U.S.-Philippine military alliance, but he also made overtures to China that he's open to a potentially dramatic expansion of ties between the two countries. Find all of today's front page stories at WashingtonTimes.com/front page or on the Washington Times app, and find us wherever you get your podcasts. Just search Washington Times in your favorite podcast app. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram at Wash Times for breaking news, sports, commentary, and more. For the Washington Times, I'm George Gerbo.